Hey guys, Will here. So today we're taking a look at Cube Control's SP01 sim racing pedals. Now these have a very high-end price tag and very distinctive and high-end looks to match, but as we all know, sim racing pedals are the most important thing on your rig when it comes to driving quickly and consistently. So let's find out whether these have the performance to match the looks and the price tag. Let's get started. So quick thank you to Cube Controls for sending across these pedals for us to check out and review for you guys today. Now, if you're not familiar with our content, one of the things that we like to do here at Boosted Media is cross-compare products against some other options that are available in the market, just to give you a better understanding of what might suit your needs best. So it's important that you guys know that all the products that we'll be talking about in today's video were all sent to us under the exact same conditions, so all provided to us free of charge for review purposes. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video or anything that we discussed, there will be some links down in the description below. Those are affiliate links, which are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. And that's just something that's available to you guys if you find what we do here of value and want to help support us so we can keep on making these videos. But it's important that you also know that there's no creative control from anybody externally to Boosted Media. Nobody gets to see the video before you guys do. And of course, everything that we're going to be discussing today is purely just my own observations and my own opinions. So let's dive in now and start off by talking about pricing. Now, I did warn you in the intro that these pedals are quite expensive. So let's just dive straight into it. So you're looking at €1,099, not including tax or shipping, for the basic 2-pedal set. If you want the carbon fiber formula style throttle pedal upgrade, whether or not you actually call it an upgrade is debatable. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But if you do want to order with the carbon fiber throttle pedal, you're looking at €1,129, again, not including taxes or shipping. Now, there's also a pedal upgrade kit available for the brake pedal, which includes a selection of different elastomers, some metal cups, and various different springs and bits and pieces. We'll look at that in just a minute, but I've got a bit of a bone to pick with Cube Controls here, because when you look at their product page, it kind of looks, to me at least, like that is included as part of the purchase price. You wouldn't know unless you went across to the accessories page that it's actually an optional accessory, which is going to cost you €59.90. So not a massive amount of additional expense, but it is something that I think should be included at the price. And it is something that if you just glanced at the website and looked at the product page, you would probably actually think was included, but then it's actually listed across on the accessories page. So just be aware of that one. That is an upgrade that I would recommend purchasing because it is a relatively small cost compared to the cost of the pedals. It's just worthwhile having that additional flexibility in terms of setup so you can really explore and make sure you're getting the absolute most out of your brake pedal. So consider that guy as well. Now, there isn't a base plate or heel plate available from Cube Controls. We'll talk about mounting a little bit later on for you guys as well. And there's also isn't a clutch pedal available at this time either, although when we look at the software later on, you'll see that there is provision for it in the software. So I assume that they're planning on releasing that at some point. It'd be crazy not to, but at least at the time that we're doing this review, it is not something that's available and not something that we're going to be looking at today. Now, just to give you a bit of a cross comparison against some of the other competitor products that we would recommend at around this same kind of quality and driving experience level, you've got the VRS, and we've got reviews of all of these pedals down in the description below if you want to check them out and get our opinions on those as well. But the VRS Direct Force Pro pedals for the 2-pedal set, that comes in at €597. That's not including taxes or shipping. You've got the Husingville Ultimate Plus pedals. The 2-pedal set for those comes in at €974.38, again excluding taxes and shipping. We also looked at the V&M pedals just a couple of weeks ago here at Boosted Media too, and we were really impressed with those. Those come in at $450 or $630 with the damper and performance kit, which I do recommend. That equates to about €580 at today's exchange rate, again not including taxes or shipping. And shipping does vary quite a lot with those particular pedals depending on where you are in the world, so it's worth shopping around, just making sure that you're getting the best possible deal with various different resellers that might have them available in your particular area. So again, I would definitely recommend checking out our full review videos of all those products to give you a better understanding of exactly what might suit your needs best. The reason I've chosen those particular products for comparison is because they all provide a somewhat similar driving experience to what we have here with the SP01s, give or take a couple of little features and benefits, things like that, which are covered in those reviews. Now, we also need to mention as well the Acertec SimSport Sports, Invicta, and Forte pedals. Now, they don't have the same level of adjustment available on their brake pedals, at least by default. There is a extended adjustment kit available for both those pedal sets. So they're not quite comparing apples to apples quite the same as the other products that we mentioned previously, but those are worth considering as well. Their Invicta pedal set, which actually uses a hydraulic design for the brake pedal, comes in at €756.29, again, not including taxes or shipping, and that does have an integrated base plate as well, so that's not going to be an additional cost that you're going to be up against if you buy those pedals. They also have their Forte load cell style, which actually has a very similar driving experience to the Invictas overall, and that comes in at €462.18, again, not including taxes and shipping. So look, in my opinion, those actually provide a really great driving experience. They suit my particular style very well, but they just don't have the adjustment range available that you get from those other options. But again, you can check out the full reviews of all of those products linked down in the description below. So that kind of sets the stage for the SP01 pedals, obviously at the upper end of the price point there. And that of course means that we have the highest of the high expectations when it comes to what we should be getting out of the driving experience with these pedals. So let's dive in now and take you through exactly what you're getting for the money. So inside the box, you're going to of course find the throttle pedal and the brake pedal. You're also going to find a couple of additional elastomers here, as well as a spare spring. Now, interestingly, the spring that they include is actually the same as the one that's pre-installed inside the brake pedal. So I'm not sure exactly what the reason for that is. It would have been nice if they'd included a different spring rate just to give you that difference in the initial uptake in the pedal. Now, I don't know whether maybe they're worried about fatigue cracking in the spring maybe. It doesn't seem like it's a high wear item really, because the amount of compression in it is relatively minimal. But yeah, I can't really think of any other reason why they would include two of the same type of spring. So that is worth just considering. And then they also include two additional elastomers. So you've got a blue one, which is the stiffer one. You've got a yellow one, which is the softest one. And then the red one, which is the medium one, is pre-installed. Those are simply just going to adjust the stiffness of the pedal overall. And we'll unpack the adjustment and how that all works a little bit later on in today's video. Then they also include what I think is a Delrin material, or maybe it is just plastic, I'm not sure, but this is a little spacer to install in the throttle pedal if you want to reduce the throw further than what it is here by default. So we do have some adjustment here, and you can hear it squeaking away as I adjust it, but that's all right. It's not really a problem that affects driving, but you can adjust the amount of travel from this little dial, but if you want to reduce it even further, you can install an additional spacer in here, and that will reduce the throw even further. So good little additions there. As I mentioned earlier, there is the performance kit, which is an optional upgrade available too, and we'll look at that a little bit later on. And then they also include, which is something that Cube Controls have always been really good at with all the wheels that we've reviewed from them previously, a little bag which includes all the tools and mounting hardware that you would need for mounting these to your rig. Now, one thing that we did notice is that the bolts that they include are a little bit long for screwing these mounting brackets directly to aluminium profile via T-nuts, but they do also include some nuts as well, which would lead me to believe that they're intended to go through a pedal plate and then bolt in from the underside. So if you are wanting to mount these directly to aluminium profile, you probably will need to pick up some shorter bolts, but I do like the fact that they're M8 bolts, which they're including here. A lot of pedals are M6 or sometimes even M5, and this just does give it that little bit more sturdiness, but we're going to talk about mounting in more detail a little bit later on in today's video too. But as I said, a little Allen key for making some adjustments, a little Torx key as well for adjusting the pedal pads, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then there was a little spanner in here as well. So let's set those guys aside. And then they also include inside the box a 2 meter long USB-C to USB-A cable. So it is a USB-C interface on the back of the pedals, which is nice to see. And then a little extension cable as well for extending the reach between the throttle and the brake pedal. So if you do want to have your pedals spaced further apart on the rig, that is going to be important. By default, the brake pedal actually has this little pigtail, which connects through to your throttle pedal. So you can imagine if you've got those two connected, it is quite a short distance between the two. So yeah, nice that they include that little pigtail as well for you guys if you should need it. And that is everything that is inside the box by default. Again, remembering that this is the formula style pedal pad that we have on here. If you were to order the GT configuration, this would be the pedal pad that you're getting, which is exactly the same as the one on the brake, and you can orient that in either direction to have it pointing whichever way you want. And there's also some additional holes in here as well, so you can move that pedal pad up and down on your throttle and your brake to get that adjusted into the correct position for your foot size. But we'll talk about grip levels and all those things on the pedal pads a little bit later on. We'll also talk about the brake performance performance kit later on when we get into the details on the brake as well, remembering that it is an optional upgrade. So that is everything that you're going to get inside the box. So let's dive in now, take a more detailed look at the hardware, starting with some of the features that are common between both pedals. So we've got a combination of 6061 and 7075 aluminium. The 7075 is a stiffer, stronger aluminium than the 6061. I guess that they're probably using the 7075 on the pedal arms and the 6061 for the rest of the pedal, but I'm not 100% certain on that. That's just a guess on my part. And you can see the beautiful blue anodizing on the pedal arms and then black anodizing on the parts down through here. So a really nice thick and sturdy construction throughout the pedal itself, with the exception, I would say though, of the mounting brackets, which you do actually bolt on separately. Now you can see these do have a little bit of adjustment up and down here as well, so you can adjust the angle of the pedals relative to the base plate that you've got it mounted on. Now, one thing that I did notice is that my magnet doesn't stick to the mounting brackets for the throttle pedal, but it does stick to the mounting brackets for the brake pedal. So even though these are the same thickness, there's definitely a difference between the material that they're using for the two of these. I'm not sure whether this is maybe aluminium or just a stainless steel, which doesn't have a lot of magnetism, but this is definitely something that the magnet's sticking to. So yeah, not sure exactly what's going on there. But I did notice on both pedals, and you guys can see for yourselves, where we've mounted this with washers, it's actually deformed the metal quite significantly. So it does appear to be quite a soft metal. Now, I didn't notice, and you guys can see in footage for yourself, I didn't notice any flex in the mounts themselves. It was actually the pedal plate on my Track Racer TR120 that was dipping a little bit under absolutely extreme, as heavy as I possibly could kind of braking scenarios. So yeah, look, I didn't have any issues with flex or bending or anything like that, but it does appear to be quite a soft metal, and you can see the powder coating is actually scraping off a little bit in a few areas there too. So yeah, it doesn't quite carry the same quality in the mounting brackets as we see elsewhere on the pedal, which is a little bit surprising, but hasn't caused us any problems so far. Let us know down in the comments if you do own these pedals and have had any issues with bending or flexing in the mounting brackets themselves. You can see the design of the brake pedal is a little bit more sturdy than it is in the throttle pedal with regards to those mounting brackets. So yeah, just a little observation there. Again, let us know in the comments if you've had any dramas there. Now, with regards to the pedal pads as well, this is a 5mm thick genuine carbon fiber pad that you get with the Formula style arrangement, and a die-cast aluminium pad that you get with the GT style. And that has a really nice textured finish on it as well, which I think is either glass bead or sandblasted, not 100% certain, but it's very similar to the finish that we get on the Husingveld Sprint and Ultimate Plus pedals, if you've seen those reviews. So we'll talk about the experience between the two types of different pedal pads when we get into the driving experience a little bit later on in today's video. And that is pretty much everything with regards to common features between the two of them. One thing just to note while we do have both pedals here on the table is that the throttle pedal is using a Hall effect sensor for detecting the throttle position, and the brake pedal is using a 200 kilogram load cell for detecting the brake pressure. So different design between the two of them. We do see some pedal sets using a load cell across all three pedals. Not really an advantage for the throttle and clutch pedal, I wouldn't say, simply because we are detecting position anyway with the way those are designed, even for ones that are using a load cell. So brake is always force or pressure based, and the throttle and clutch are always position based, and that can be achieved in a number of different ways, from a Hall effect sensor like what we have here through to a potentiometer, which does have the disadvantage of having moving parts which are mechanical inside, so they can wear and tear or take on dirt and debris over time. Although if you're seeing a pedal set that's using an automotive grade potentiometer, it's generally not an issue anyway. It's only if you get down into the really entry level stuff like the original CSL Elite pedals from Fanatec, and say your Logitech G29, 920, G923 pedals and so forth. So not really a consideration here. So let's set our brake pedal aside for now and take a deeper dive into exactly what we have here with the throttle pedal. So I already discussed the Hall effect sensor. Now look, the design of this is pretty simple overall. The electronics are all housed underneath this little plastic cover here, and are also accessible underneath the plastic cover on the bottom there. Otherwise, all aluminium construction as we discussed before. You can see on the back here as well, we've got the little USB-C port, as well as our two expansion ports for connecting our brake pedal and our clutch pedal when that becomes available one day into the future. So it's nice that they have all the electronics actually integrated into the pedal itself. Keeps it nice and shielded here, although it is plastic covers on the top and bottom, but relatively nicely shielded by the aluminium shell around it. It didn't have any problems with electromagnetic interference or anything like that. Not that we ever really do here at Booster Media anyway. We've never had a problem with anything that we've tested over the years. And you can see we've got nice high quality metal ball bearing pivot points throughout the pedal as well. So the pedal pivots just here, And then we also have a pivot point in the back here as well, just to allow that carrier to move back and forth. Now, in terms of adjustment, things do work a little bit differently from what you might be used to. So you'll notice that unlike a lot of other pedals, there isn't actually a spring on this part here. So the only spring which is providing force against your foot is the return spring, which is hidden down inside the assembly here. So there is a little preload screw available here for winding in and out the preload or the initial resistance that you feel against your foot on the throttle pedal. And I describe it as having quite a linear response. A lot of other pedals that we've tested over the years, they get a little bit stiffer as you get down, which can actually aid you in muscle memory if you're using muscle memory for your throttle inputs. Whereas this is a little bit more linear, so you don't really have quite such a sensation of exactly where you are in the stroke, which may be a good thing for some people, may not be. For me personally, I do prefer a bit more of a progressive feel in the throttle pedal, but it is a very subjective thing. I think that anybody's going to adapt to this throttle pedal and be absolutely fine. But I would say otherwise, the feeling of the throttle pedal is pretty unremarkable. And we'll talk about that later when we get into the driving experience as well. But just to give you the rundown on the rest of the design here, we've talked about the preload adjustment here. We already talked about the adjustment up and down for the pedal pads as well. Remembering that if you have the GT style, you have 4 adjustment points. On the Formula style, you only have 2 adjustment points, as you can see here. And then on the back, we also have this little bump stop, as we described earlier, which you can wind in and out to increase or decrease the pedal stroke. We also have the little spacer, which you can also install in here to increase that pedal stroke further. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly, you can hear that squeaking away as we unwind it, but it doesn't squeak when we're operating the pedal, so that's not something to be too concerned about. That's just the rubber bump stop squeaking up against this coated shaft that's running through the middle here. So if we wanted to install that little spacer, what we would do is actually undo the shaft, and that just comes loose from the clevis up here. We then wind that out like so. We can then remove this, remove our little nylon sleeve here, and then we can install the second spacer, and that is going to reduce the throw overall. As you can imagine, you'd wind that back in, and then your pedal throw has been reduced. Now, there is one pretty significant design issue, I would say, that we've experienced here. So you'll notice that this nylon sleeve can actually slide in and out of the housing here, which is obviously important for being able to install the spacer. When that rubber bump stop pushes up against the nylon, it tends to stick a little bit. Then when you release the pedal, the entire assembly slides back. And that can, in the best case scenario, kind of create this awkward feeling as you kind of bump up against the nylon and it slides back in. On the worst case scenarios, it actually comes completely out and goes offset and actually binds up, so you can't actually push the pedal down at all. And that's what's actually caused those little notches that you see in the nylon. And so yeah, look, it's a relatively easy fix, but I just wouldn't expect to come across a significant issue like that on a pedal set that costs this much money. Yeah, look, overall, I really like the design of these pedals. It's nice and clean, it's functional, it does all the things it needs to do really nicely. But yeah, I struggle to see how they didn't identify that as a potential issue in their testing. Maybe I just got unlucky, I'm not sure, but it is what it is. So that's a quick overview of the throttle pedal. Let's move across to the brake pedal now. So this is a little bit more intricate in its design. And again, I really like how compact and integrated everything is here. You can see the fly lead that we talked about before with a nice high quality connection which passes through to our throttle pedal. So no issues there. Again, remember, we do have that extension cable too if you want to have them spaced further apart. So don't be concerned about that being relatively short. And I do like the fact that they've kept this cable relatively short and then included an extension rather than making this longer than some people might want. I think that's a clever design choice there. So look, essentially the way this is operating in terms of the pivot point and everything is very similar to the throttle pedal, but in the case of the brake pedal, we have a 200 kilogram load cell, which I believe is just a Maven unit, the same as what we see on most load cell pedals these days, mounted underneath here. You can see a nice big chunky bolt here through on this side and then 2 fixtures on this side too. So what basically happens is as you push the pedal down, this entire assembly on the back of the pedal is actually pivoting at this point here. So you can see a couple of additional pivot points. You've got one here, one in the front, of course, and then one which you can't see underneath here as well. So what happens is as you push the pedal down, force is exerted through the elastomers, and that causes the entire back end of the pedal to pivot around. That movement then actually comes through this piece of aluminium here, and that creates a deflection between this side and this side of the load cell. There's then a little strain gauge inside the load cell itself, and that's what actually measures the deflection in the load cell and is interpreted as the force inside the game. So again, I'm not 100% certain on exactly what the maximum pedal force is. It will obviously vary depending on how you have the pedal face adjusted, because that will change the ratio. Now, I am a pretty heavy braker. I generally brake with around 70 to 80 kilograms of braking force, and even pushing as hard as I possibly could with explosive force, I wasn't able to max out the load cell. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for anybody. Definitely going to stand up to even the heaviest of brakers. Now, again, we do have a preload adjustment for the return spring down in the front here, although I don't really see a lot of need to make adjustments there, because most of the resistance that you're going to be feeling in the pedal is provided via the elastomer and spring stack in the middle here. So we have a preload dial here. We're going to come back to that in just a minute and discuss another issue that I had with the preload. But we also have this damper on the top of the pedal here too. Now that provides a kind of hydraulic feel to the pedal overall. It does give the sensation of the pedal being mechanically connected to something inside the car, which is quite a nice addition. Now, I have said of some pedal sets in the past that I didn't really feel like it made a significant difference. In the case of the Fanatic V3 pedals, if you purchase that damper upgrade kit, it's not actually something that I've ever recommended. I've seen quite a few cases, including my own, where that started to leak over time, and I just didn't feel like it really added anything particularly remarkable, I guess, to the overall experience. My opinion on that changed when I reviewed the V&M pedals just recently. I did feel like that was quite a significant improvement. And again, with this pedal set, I do feel like it does make quite a significant difference. If I dial it down to the minimum setting of number 1, you do definitely notice that the pedal doesn't feel as authentic as it does if you wind it up to say like 3.5. Now it's a little bit confusing because the numbers on the back here go from 1 through to 6, but if we rotate it, we've actually got 16 clicks in total. So yeah, a little bit confusing there, but anyway, the long and the short of it is basically the higher you wind it up, the more resistance that you feel in the pedal. And I found that a value around about 3 to 4 felt pretty good to me, pretty authentic, but again, that's going to be a very subjective personal choice type thing. But the point here is that it does make a significant and noticeable difference to the driving experience, and one that I think is quite welcome. So it does give it that little bit of extra authenticity with regards to the pedal feel. So let's dive in now and talk a little bit more about this elastomer stack. So the way that this works is actually very similar to what we just looked at on the throttle pedal, but you've got a preload dial here, which allows you to wind in a little bit of preload on the spring and elastomer stack itself. So that's just going to change the amount of initial resistance that you feel against the pedal. So I'm going to wind that out quickly now. You can see I've got that wound in quite tight, and there's a good reason for that, which I'll explain in just a minute. So as we wind that out, we can see the spring and elastomer actually ends up becoming non-captive. So that means it just rattles around a little bit, and that actually gives us a little bit of initial uptake in the pedal. So if you like to have a little bit of slack in the pedal to simulate that sensation of initial uptake, it does actually work quite well on this pedal, remembering that we do have that secondary spring down in the bottom. So the pedal doesn't just become completely sloppy. You do still feel a little bit of resistance there, but you do get that clearly defined second stage when you actually get into braking. And that's not to be confused with the threshold point, which comes later on in the stroke as well. So it's kind of like a 2 or 3 phase braking system, depending on how you set it up. If you want to have that initial uptake, it becomes sort of like a 3 stage. If you don't have that initial uptake, it remains sort of a 2 stage with the initial phase of braking and then the threshold point beyond that, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I want to just quickly talk about the other issue that I ran into here before we remove this elastomer stack and talk about the springs themselves. So what I found was that if I didn't have quite a significant amount of preload here on the spring, this preload knob was actually unwinding while I was driving. We've seen this issue on a couple of other pedal sets in the past. My original Husingvarp Ultimate Non-Pluses, which I bought secondhand, and God knows how old they were, but they had quite a significant issue with this as well. Of course, muscle memory is absolutely vitally important when it comes to driving quickly and consistently. So anything that's changing as you're driving is going to have a detrimental effect on that. So look, it is a relatively easy fix. All they would need to do is just make this little piece of aluminium a little bit smaller and then add a secondary nut on the top of that so you could actually bind the threads together and stop it from being able to move. So easy to fix, but again, not something that I would expect to see on a pedal set of this caliber and this kind of price point. So just something to keep in mind there, because it does have a detrimental effect on the driving experience. But if you do wind in a lot of preload on the spring, it doesn't seem to happen. It's only if you like it to be a little bit more on the weaker side. But yeah, just keep it in mind. But what I want to do now is remove this elastomer stack and just explain to you exactly how this works. So same way as before, we're just going to loosen the shaft from the clevis up the top, making sure that we hold the preload retainer in place so that it doesn't wind with it. And this will basically reach the point where it becomes quite loose, and we can just slide that pin completely out from the elastomer stack, and then that allows us to remove the stack from the pedal. Now it is a little bit awkward depending on what combination of spacers and bits and pieces you have, but you can just kind of slide it out and you can see the whole thing kind of just falls apart. So I'll set the brake pedal aside just for now, and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly how this works. So you've got your preload adjustment there, and then inside that, we'll move that aside too. You've got a couple of spring perches here, which are again made of, I think, a Delrin material, perhaps some other type of material, I'm not 100% sure. So you've got your spring there, and then you've got your elastomer on the other side, and they push together. And basically, the weaker of the two, the one that provides the least resistance, is going to compress first, and then the second one will compress as well. So you can imagine if the spring is compressing first, it's going to reach a point where it can't compress any further, and then the elastomer is going to start to compress further. So in the case of the standard configuration, as comes with the pedals by default, there's no sort of, I guess, retainer on this elastomer to stop it from blowing out or going beyond its maximum tolerance. However, if you do purchase the performance kit, you get a whole bunch of various different bits and pieces, including some little metal cups here, or aluminium cups, which do actually sit over that elastomer and limit the amount of deflection which we can have here. So I'm just going to grab a different elastomer here. I'll grab this one and explain. So if I pop that guy in the hard shell, you can imagine as the elastomer compresses, it's not going to be able to compress further than what this metal shell allows it to, and that basically just limits the amount of travel. So what that's going to do is it's going to provide that second phase of braking where you're hitting that threshold point a little bit sooner, and that's going to mean that the pedal is going to feel more like you're pushing up against a brick wall when you reach that point. Whereas if we look at the soft cup, the only difference here is that the diameter of the cup is a little bit wider, so it allows the elastomer to squish up and compress a little bit more before we reach that point where it can't compress any further and we hit that second stage of braking. Now, they also include an assortment of different springs here as well, so if you like a softer initial uptake, you can achieve that as well. And yeah, look, honestly, I would say that they've done a really, really fantastic job with the various different configurations that they have here. I really like the fact that they're including springs as well as elastomers, because they do compress at different rates. It gives us that really nice, clearly defined threshold point in our braking, which is something that I always say is vitally important when it comes to driving quickly and consistently. So what I would say here is that regardless of the configuration that you go with, from soft all the way through to hard, one of the things that I noticed, which I thought was exceptionally good about this particular brake pedal, is that it promotes good driving style, it promotes good braking technique, because there's always, regardless of how you set up, there's always that threshold point which you can hit consistently and then modulate around. And because of the design of the pedal and the fact that even when you hit that brick wall, you're still exerting more pressure, more force on that load cell, it means that when you hit that maximum amount of actual physical movement in the pedal, you are still able to push beyond that. So that gives you a lot of control in terms of modulation. Now, any good load cell set of pedals will work in that same manner. So it's not really something that's a design feature of the pedal overall, if that makes sense. But yeah, just the way that they've designed this and the different combinations of elastomers and springs that they've included in the performance kit, it just really does, in my opinion at least, encourage good braking technique, which is something that I really appreciate about this. So yeah, really good job overall with the design of the brake, I would say, from the way it feels all the way through to just how compact it is and you know, just how nice it is to look at as well. I think they've done a really good job. Just that one issue with the preload coming loose when you're driving, which is not a small issue. It's you know, it is a significant issue. I don't want to talk it down, but look, in saying that, it is a relatively easy fix as well. Hopefully they can redesign this bit to include a little retainer nut, or if it is a problem for you, as I said, you can just take this off and just use two nuts on. I think even the nuts that they include for mounting on the base plate will even work. So yeah, you could just screw two of those on and literally have the elastomer stack sitting behind that, for example. So you could do something like this, and then what you do is once you've got it in the right amount of preload, you just bind up the two threads on either side, and that's going to stop it from moving again. So yeah, not a major issue to fix, but definitely a major issue when you're considering how expensive the pedals are. You just shouldn't be having problems like that. So lastly, before we get into the software and driving experience, let me just talk you through how I actually ended up configuring the pedal after testing out pretty much every single combination that I could think of. So I actually ended up with the hardest overall setting. So we've got our retainer at the top. We then have our spring perch, our hard metal spring, another retainer, and then a little spacer here to make sure that we're exerting even force across the face of the elastomer. So I'll pop that guy in too. A little bit tricky to get to pop in, but it does work. There we go. Slot it into that side just fine. So that guy goes there. Then I went with the hard cup to limit the amount of deflection in that elastomer, and then another little perch here on the back. and that was my stack overall. So I prefer a stiffer pedal. That's what worked well for me. But the important thing to note here, just once again quickly, is that regardless of how you configure this, pretty much, you're always going to still have that clearly defined threshold point, which is something that I really appreciated about those pedals. So let's have a quick run through the Cube Control software for these pedals, now called Cube Pedal UI. Now, one thing I do want to note here is that you are looking at a separate software package for each of the Cube Controls devices that you have on your system. So there's one bit of software for the wheels, one bit of software for the pedals, and so forth. Now, the reason I call that out is a lot of other manufacturers these days are integrating everything into the one software package. Now, it's not a big deal by any means. You don't need to have the software running every single time you use the pedals or anything like that. So not really a problem, but it would be cool to see them have one package that has everything integrated into the one neat little thing, so you're not having to switch between apps should you need to go in. So this is the pedal UI. If we switch over to the Cube set for the wheel software, you can see it's presented in exactly the same manner, but I'll close that guy off again. And this is the pedal software. So pretty basic stuff. There's not a whole lot to go through here. You've probably already noticed here there's a button to enable the clutch. We don't have the clutch, of course. The clutch doesn't exist yet as far as we know, but obviously they are planning on doing a clutch, otherwise that wouldn't be in the software. So that is your inputs. You can see down the bottom it's showing the raw data coming in from the load cell and the Hall effect sensor on the throttle. Now we have a separate dedicated video where I went through my recommendations for setting up load cell style pedals, but just to give you the basic rundown here, top and bottom dead zone adjustments for each of the pedals. I typically like to have a bit of top dead zone on my throttle pedal just to make absolutely sure that I'm always hitting 100% throttle. If there's any sort of drift in the calibration at the very top of the pedal's range, having a few percent there is just going to allow us to make sure we're always hitting that 100% mark. I don't have any bottom threshold, but if you do have a habit of resting your foot on the throttle, or if you're using a pedal set that has a little bit of slop at the bottom, then you can add that in. But this particular pedal set, as you guys have already seen, has absolutely no issues at all when it comes to anything like that. So that is not a problem. No top dead zone for the brake. That's all done through the calibration, which I'll show you in just a moment. I do like though to have just a couple of percent on the bottom of my brake pedal too, just to make absolutely sure. It's a little bit touchy here. It'd be nice if they had a slider that you could use with arrow keys, but just 2% there. That is going to mean that when I rest my foot on the brake pedal, it's not picking up any brake input and dragging the brakes inside the game. So that is everything there on the input page. We also then have the calibration. Now it is important to note that the calibration is stored on the pedals themselves. So when you go in to calibrate things like iRacing that have their own calibration, all you need to do is just push it to the maximum, release it to the minimum, and the calibration that you have set in here is all good to go. So very simple process here. You literally just click on calibrate, go to the maximum, go back to the minimum for the throttle, hit save. And then for the brake, it's a little bit more arbitrary. So what I like to do personally and what I recommend is hit calibrate and then push the pedal to the threshold point, which is going to be dependent on how you have these adjusted, what elastomers you're using and whatnot. So the threshold where you feel a transition that you can consistently hit, then push a little bit past that for your maximum amount of braking force that you ever want to have to put into the pedal for 100% braking pressure, and then release it, hit save. And you can see it has actually added in a little bit of noise down the bottom there. So we're going to go back in and just tune that out with our dead zone. So we're going to wind that up until we're not seeing any reading there. You can see that's now gone down to 0. So what we should see now is when we push to our threshold point, about 80% braking pressure, as you can see there, and then we can modulate to 100%. Or around that just fine. Now we do also have the ability to export and import profiles. So if you want to set up different profiles for different cars or try out your mate's profiles, you do have the ability to do that here. No cloud functionality here, so you can't load in other people's profiles directly in the software. You will have to download them from Discord or some other community and just import them manually. We do have the ability here to set non-linear response curves as well. Not something that I ever really use for the brake pedal. A lot of people do swear by it though, but what you can do here is adjust each individual node to adjust the response of each pedal. So you can see if you want a non-linear curve like that, for example, you just adjust the nodes, and it works exactly the same way with the throttle as well. So say, for example, you're driving a really powerful rear-wheel drive car without traction control, you might want to set so the initial uptake is a little bit softer, for example, and then have it ramp up a little bit harder as you get towards the end. That's just going to help you to not break traction on corner exit. Or if you're driving a really underpowered car where you want to get on the throttle really quickly, you can wind it around the other way, and that would allow you to get on the throttle a little bit more quickly and a little bit more aggressively at the start and then have it taper off towards the end. Now, one thing just to note here as well, for those of you who like to set a threshold point at, say, 80% braking pressure, so the pedals never go beyond that to stop you from being able to lock up at all. It's a bit of a cheat that some people do in iRacing in particular, just to sort of try to not lock up so much. You don't have the ability to adjust that final point here down. Some other pedal sets do actually have an additional node here as well, so you can cap it at 80%, but that isn't something that you can do here. So not a problem for me, not a problem for most people, but if that is something that's important to you, just be aware that that is something that's missing. Another thing that I notice here as well is that there isn't an easy way to just return these to default. Now, I haven't saved the calibration to the pedals, so when I exit the software and come back in again, theoretically it should just go back to a linear curve. But yeah, a little bit clumsy there. It would be good to have a reset button if you mess things up, because it is, you know, there isn't an easy way to sort of see exactly where the 0 point is. It's all kind of just referenced on a graph rather than having physical numbers. The same deal as well with the calibration. It would be nice to have a number there, just so that, say, for example, you're mucking around with the elastomers, you want to reset to the same amount of braking pressure, but you need to recalibrate the pedals. You kind of just have to do it visually here. Whereas if you have a number, say you're always pushing to, I don't know, say 70 kilograms of force, something like that, it would be nice if they had a number there that you could see, so you could just set that value again in your calibration, or maybe even just input the number later on. So yeah, a couple of little improvements in the software there, but they do seem to have fixed some of the bugs that we saw in some of the earlier versions of the software, which is good. So then down to device, this is where we update our firmware on the pedal, so you can manually update from a supplied file or just check online for an update. Very simple to flash the firmware. We don't really need to run through that. You literally just click on the button and it goes through the process, reboots, and it's all good to go. Reboots the pedals, I should say, not your PC. And then the About tab just has a little bit more information about the firmware version, which is currently installed. And that is it. So let's dive in now and talk more about the driving experience. Okay, so let's unpack the driving experience a little bit more with these pedals. Now, I've already talked about the two problems that I encountered while driving with these pedals earlier on when we were taking a look at the hardware, so I'm not gonna dive into that in too much more detail now, but suffice to say that it did have an impact overall on the driving experience, which was really disappointing with these pedals, because overall, the experience, particularly with the brake pedal, is absolutely fantastic with these. Among the best that I've ever experienced in terms of load cell pedals, and even hydraulic pedals, if you don't include things like the SimiCube active pedals, which are obviously just in a completely different price bracket altogether. But yeah, really, really fantastic experience with the brake pedal, just other than the fact that the preload kept on winding itself out. And you know, that does alter the feeling of the pedals while you're driving, which is not something that you want. Muscle memory is the most important thing when it comes to driving quickly and consistently with a brake pedal. And anything that's sort of moving or slipping or adjusting while you're driving is going to be detrimental to that. So that is definitely something that they need to resolve. Likewise with the throttle pedal as well, that little nylon insert did keep on sliding out. And you do really feel that when you push the pedal down the next time, it has this point of resistance. And you could actually see after quite a bit of driving time, as you saw earlier in the video, you do end up with some little dents inside that nylon sleeve where it's kind of biting into the metal around it. It just doesn't make any sense because they are so well presented. The build quality, the materials, all that stuff is absolutely top notch. But you know, there's just a couple of little design flaws, I guess you could describe it as, that just kind of let these pedals down a little bit with regards to those two things. But otherwise, in terms of the driving experience, the only other negative thing that I could find was just how loud the throttle pedal is, again, compared to some other options on the market at around this same kind of quality and price point, or even cheaper. So when you push the pedal to the maximum, you've got a little rubber bump stop which pushes up against that nylon insert that we were talking about just before. And that does give quite a mechanical click to it when you hit that maximum threshold. So it is quite noisy. But when you return the pedal back to zero, if you do that by just lifting your foot off, you do get a metal to metal clunk on that pedal return. Some of the other pedal sets that you might be looking at around this same kind of range, like your Husingville Ultimate Plus pedals, your V&M pedals that we looked at just recently too, as well as, what else does it? The VRS pedals too. They have a polyurethane hose over a little piece of metal, and that actually creates a nice soft bump stop, which still has a good mechanical clunk to it, but doesn't result in as much noise as this particular throttle pedal does. But look, otherwise, let's talk about the driving experience with the throttle pedal first, and we'll move across into the brake. So look, I would say that the throttle pedal is pretty unremarkable. I would really like to see a damper on the throttle pedal at this kind of price point. It's something that I've always said I can take or leave, but having tested those V&M pedals just recently, I did really appreciate the improvement that that optional damper kit did make to those pedals, and that's just something that's lacking on this throttle pedal compared to other options. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly smooth. There's no flex or wobble or anything like that. So none of those things are issues. But for the price point, I was expecting an exceptional experience, and there's just really nothing here that was overly remarkable. In terms of the two different pedal pads, I would say just skip over the more expensive Formula style pad, the carbon fiber one. I did do extensive testing with both. Look, I just found that the carbon fiber didn't really add any particular benefit. One thing I did notice on the Formula style carbon fiber pads is that those countersunk holes are quite sharp. Wasn't too much of an issue for me, but if I push the pedal lower down, I can definitely feel those sharp edges, and I can imagine that it would definitely do some damage to the sole of your boots if you're running with boots, or wear down your socks pretty quickly as well. So yeah, no real need, I would say, to go to the carbon fiber unless you just like the aesthetic. The GT style was absolutely fine. I actually really like the material and the finish that they've used on that GT style pad. It slips quite nicely underfoot, regardless of whether you're using boots or socks. One observation I did have is that when my feet got a little bit sweaty, they did start to stick a little bit more on the material, so you do feel a little bit of a change there, but that's going to depend on the type of socks that you're wearing. These particular ones that I'm using here are bamboo, and yeah, just something that I noticed. It wasn't a problem, but yeah, just an observation. So that's it in terms of the throttle pedal. Overall, I would say pretty unremarkable for the price point. Nothing particularly special that would make me want to spend the extra money for something like this over plenty of the other options that we've tested in the past. So let's move over onto the brake pedal now. Now, this was an absolutely fantastic experience if we set aside what we discussed with that preload adjustment winding itself out over time. So the thing that really stood out to me here with the brake pedal was just how clearly defined that threshold point is. Probably more clearly defined than any other pedal set that I've tested, and that goes for pretty much the entire adjustment range. So the other thing that I really liked about these pedals is just how much adjustment you have. Even with this standard elastomer set, you've got a pretty good range of adjustment here, but if you go for that performance kit, which I would recommend is worth the extra, simply because it is going to allow you to, you know, really dial the pedals in and make sure that you're getting exactly the right experience to suit your particular driving style. I really do wish that they included it in the price. I think at this kind of price point, there's no excuse for not including all those extra bits and pieces. Husingfeld do it with their Ultimate Pluses, so I really think that it should be the same here too. Now, normally when we review a set of pedals, I'd jump out on track and I'd sort of talk you through the experience and some of the characteristics of driving, but because there's so much adjustment available with this brake pedal, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do that because we'd be here for hours talking about each individual experience. But what you guys need to know is that regardless of whether you like a really soft pedal or you like a really hard pedal, these do definitely have you covered. And throughout that experience, it's, I would say, promoting good technique because it always maintains that threshold point, which I believe is so important to braking consistently for the reasons that we've outlined in other videos. And you can check the links down in the description below if you want to understand more about that. So yeah, really exceptionally good experience with the brake pedal, but we've had really exceptionally good experiences with other brake pedals as well at cheaper price points than this. So look, I would say for me personally, it's probably not worth the asking price unless you really, really like the aesthetic here. The build quality is fantastic, but it does have those few design flaws, which I really hope that they can get on top of. If they can, I would have absolutely no issue recommending these pedals at all. But just do keep in mind that there are other options available. In particular, I would say the VRS pedals and the V&M pedals that we reviewed just recently on the channel. I've got links down in the description below to both of those. And I would say that in both cases there, with regards to the brake pedal, the subtle differences in the actual driving experience are, I guess I could probably describe as negligible. So I think the best way to summarize here is that if the aesthetic and the materials, build quality, and the presentation of the product is worth that extra money to you, then yeah, they're a good set of pedals and they're worth the money. But if you're purely just looking at what's going to give you the best value for money in terms of the driving experience, then this probably isn't the pedal set that I would recommend. And I think it's as simple as that, guys. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up down below. Consider subscribing to the channel as well if you haven't already. Subscribing is an awesome way of letting YouTube know that the content is helpful, so it sends it out to additional people. And actually, a really frustratingly small percentage of the people that watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel, so I really do appreciate your support there. If you decide you want to pick up any of the gear that we've talked about in today's video as well, there's links to our other reviews down below, as well as some affiliate links where you can pick that gear up at no additional cost, and that is an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media if you wish to do so, if you find our content helpful. But above all, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.